We have Grandmaster Hans Niemann taking on a very strong German Grandmaster Rasmus Svane. Hans in this tournament has started slow. He's drawn with Gabriel Sargisian and Ivan Cheparinov, while Rasmus Svane has drawn 2 games against Nihal Sarin and Javokir Sindarov. So, an important clash here for Hans. If he wants to fight for the top places, he needs to score his first win in the tournament. He opens with pawn to c4, the English opening. And Rasmus goes knight to f6. You have knight coming out to c3. And pawn to c5 played. He goes g3 here, trying to get the bishop out to g2. And e6 is a very nice move. You want to play d5, so the right move now is not bishop g2 but actually knight f3, which is what Hans plays. And the point is, after d5 you want to take and push d4, which is very important. So pawn to d5 played, and now you can take. Taking with the knight is also possible, but Rasmus goes very solid with ed5, and we are actually going into now the Tarrasch territory with d4, the main line of the Tarrasch system. Knight comes out to c6, and he goes bishop to g2. Now pawn takes pawn is taken here. And this is kind of the main line now. Knight takes d4 and you bring your bishop out to c5. So, yes, that's exactly what Rasmus does. And look at Niemann's face. He knows that this is very drawish in nature. Knight to b3 played. And now bishop b6 is the main line. Yes, he plays it. Often in this opening, it so happens you don't get a chance to get a fighting position, as it's very, very drawish in nature. Knight a4. By the way, knight d5 is a playable line here, but bishop e6 and black has enough compensation for the missing pawn. So knight a4, castles, he takes on b6, and now a takes b6. Hans brings his bishop out to e3. Rook comes to e8. Now you should be careful. Rook takes e3 is a possibility. But Hans is not impacted. He goes short castles here. And now pawn to h5. He's trying to create play on the king side. h3 played, so that if h4 you meet it with g4. And the knight jumps into e4 now. Tactics here. Knight takes g3 is possible. F takes g3 and rook takes e3. So have to be careful. Hans quietly plays his bishop to d4. And bishop f5 played here. He goes pawn to e3. And the bishop drops back to g6. He plays his pawn to h4, fixing the pawn on h5 here. And the knight comes back to f6 here. White's position slowly starting to get slightly better. Hans plays his pawn to a3 so that later it won't be hanging when he moves the rook. Knight takes d4. And he takes back with the knight. Bishop comes in. He wants to trade another pair of minor pieces. And Hans brings his rook to c1. Take on g2. Bishop takes g2. And he takes king takes on g2. He brings his rook to c8, offering a trade. And he takes rook takes rook. Queen takes c8 and now brings his queen to d3. And the queen is well positioned here, looking in both the directions. But rook e7 played here by Rasmus. Queen comes to b3. b6 pawn is hanging. He goes queen c5, defending b6 and d5 pawns. And now rook to d1. Slowly and steadily, d5 pawn is a weakness. You can go knight e2 to f4 to then have 3 attackers here. Yes, he plays knight e2. And rook comes into e4. The point is that if he goes back knight d4, if you had gone knight f4 here, d4 would have equalized. So knight d4, rook goes back to e7. Rasmus would be happy with the draw, but Hans isn't. He's now threatening rook c2. Knight jumps into e4. And he plays rook to c2, taking over the c file. The knight on d4 cannot be disturbed. The b6, d5 and b7 pawns are a bit weak. So clearly white is for choice. But black's position has good defensive chances. A check to the king. The king moves up to g7. And now Hans plays this very interesting move, queen b4. He's ready to trade queens, but Rasmus denies it. And I'm not so sure. If he would have taken, I believe it would have given him good drawing chances. But queen f6 and now knight to f3. And black plays his knight to c5. And Hans now manages to trade queens. He takes queen here. Rasmus, knight takes is kind of important to not spoil the structure. So knight takes d4. And let's take stock of the situation. We have a rook and knight and 6 pawns per side. But it's the quality of the pawns. These 2 pawns are doubled and isolated. This pawn is also isolated. So clearly here it's Hans who is pressing. King f1. He goes knight e6, offering a trade of knights. But Hans declines it. He plays knight to b5. And the king comes in, king to e5. And the rook drops back. Rook comes up to d7. And you can see slowly and steadily Hans bringing in his pieces. We are going to reach move number 40 now. Although Rasmus has 1 minute on the clock, all he has to do is make a couple of moves and then gets additional 50 minutes on the clock. It's because of this increment here, which is not just like few seconds, but like 50 minutes. It's very difficult to beat someone in this time control who is solid. Rook d8. He's waiting here, waiting for the opportunity to arise to pounce in. But Rasmus is just moving his rook back and forth. And rook to b3. You can see Hans has 55 minutes. Rasmus has 45 minutes on the clock. The knight goes to c5, attacking the rook. Takes control of the 4th rank. And now maybe there is rook d4, rook f4 as well. Knight goes back to a6, attacking the rook once again. And now rook a4. Because if the knight moves, then I can enter in. Knight to c5. But he goes rook d4. He doesn't go in to a8. The knight jumps into e4 here. Look at the maneuvering nature of this game. Oh my goodness. Rook to b4. And he goes back, rook d8. He comes back, knight to d4. This time, very concretely attacking the b6 pawn. There's only one move left here for black to be closer to equality than losing, is rook to d6. Plays his rook to the a file, and now rook f6, attacking the f2 pawn. The knight comes back to f3, giving a check. And Rasmus goes back, king to d6. Well, in general, Hans has not been able to break through. So rook d4. And rook to f5, defending the pawn on d5, and rook d1. Goes rook to f6 here. And rook to c1 played. Somewhere black needs to do something active, but Rasmus is not in the mood to do something. He's just waiting here because the knight is also tied up. f2 is hanging. He goes rook g1. And I'm not so sure where he wants to head. I think he wants to head rook g2, knight d4, and then push it away. And rook to g2. There you see, defending the pawn on f2. Knight comes back to c5. And Hans brings his knight to d4. He brings his knight to the center of the board. And knight a4. He's trying to run away to the other side to hassle white's queenside pawns, but b4 just gaining space. Knight to b2. And he comes back, rook to g1. And now this knight would have loved to come back to the e4 square to attack f2, but it's too far away. And therein, Hans Niemann has Hans goes knight to b5 check, and all of a sudden, like, black needs to be like where to go with the king. King c6, king d7. He decides to go king e7. But isn't rook d1 just dropping the pawn on d5? So he goes rook d1, attacking the d5 pawn. Rook f5, defending it. And f4. I like this move because he's taken away almost all the squares from the black rook. Rook to f6. And he chops off the pawn. I mean, the thing is, it was not necessary to give up the pawn, but any move like king e6 met with knight c7 check. And so rook d5, and he goes rook c6. But Niemann has won a very important pawn now. The king is trying to come into the game. Knight to b2. Look at Swane's time. It's 6 minutes, while Niemann is at 57 minutes on the clock. Rook d2. And he plays his knight back here. Still some technical effort, because it won't be so easy. King to d3. Oh, he's coming in via if the rook moves to c2 to b3. And now rook c2, offering a trade of rooks. I think black shouldn't accept it. Rook g1 to attack the g3 pawn. But there are more weaknesses for black to take care of than white. So king f8. And now a very important move, king d4. So king d4, and now you can pick up the pawn here. Rook takes g3. Yes, he takes it. Rook takes g3. And knight to d6 played. What a nice move, attacking the pawn on f7. And now rook takes a3. He takes the pawn on f7. King to g8. And he takes another pawn. Rook takes on b7. Hans Niemann has somehow, kept on grinding and managed to win this. Maybe a good idea is to get the king in. He goes b5. The pawn is defended by the knight. But now black goes after another pawn on h4. Knight to c8. And what Hans has realized is that he can lose these pawns here. But if he loses the b6, if he wins the b6 pawn, he would be better. Check. And king comes up to f7. Hans comes back with his knight. Knight to d5, check. The king goes back to e8. And it's time to advance the pawns here. He's waiting. He does go e5. e5 is on the board. And the threat naturally is e6 and mate, because then all the squares are covered. And he resigns. Hans Niemann scores his first win, a 75 move grind. Not at all easy game for him, but he managed to strike, and this is the win he needed to get himself into the tournament. 2 out of 3, and will be interesting to see how this tournament shapes up for him. Hans, of course, believes in himself and backs himself that he can reach the candidates. But it's not going to be easy to keep winning games here. For now, this one was against a very strong opponent, Rasmus Svane. And best wishes to both the players. For now, this is Sagar Shah signing off. Bye-bye.
Hans, first win of the tournament. How are you feeling?
I feel good, but I really this time control is is so annoying, because you feel like you're getting so close.
Yeah.
You feel like the win's gonna come, and then 50 minutes just appears, and then they have time to recover, regroup. He was in time pressure 3 different times, so I'm sure that if he didn't get this extra 15 minutes, I would have won smoother. And then I got so frustrated, I made a mistake. But as Kramnik told me, the way you have to win is you just pretend like you're doing something, and then once they're in time pressure, then you pounce. So that's what I did, and not the smoothest way, but I sort of, he became fatigued and tired at the end.
Do you think it was a critical moment he, missed or something?
Yeah, so, at some point he played rook f5, and then I played rook g1. And then he went, like knight c5, knight to a4, none of it really made sense. The main point was that at some point his knight couldn't return to e4. And his knight got stuck in a4, then it had to come back to c4. So he kind of, at some point, my pieces just dominated. So it can happen that way in time pressure, but I'm just glad that it's so annoying, because he played probably the most drawish move order. Like he plays c4. It was just so ridiculous, the state of openings in modern chess, that I really was so annoyed by the opening. But by miracle, at least like when I got a game, I was over the moon, just to get a game. And then it was just, it took a Herculean effort to win.
It's a very important tournament because it has 2 spots for the candidates.
Yeah.
Like, how's your mentality coming to this tournament? What were your goals?
Yeah, the main thing I think in this tournament is that if you get stuck on lower boards, especially if I'm playing low-rated people, they're not really that ambitious.
Yeah.
And with either color, if you play against a non-ambitious 2650 player, it's incredibly difficult to beat them. So hopefully, with this victory, I'll start to play against people who are ambitious, and then with ambition, things can happen, right? It's kind of like a tango, you know. It takes 2 people. So if one person wants to draw, and they're a very strong player, there's not much. It's very, very hard.
Yeah, how's your preparation for the tournament? Are you doing anything very specific for this tournament?
You know, I played the Spanish League, which had quite a similar field to this. So I thought it'd be a good warm-up to play against players of similar strength, around 26, like say 20 to 50. And then obviously you play much stronger opponents in later rounds. So I thought that was a good warm-up, but even there it was such a miserable tournament. So at least I got into classical form because I've barely played any classical chess. But this one is very, very important.
Yeah, I think this is the 3rd game, and I think you have like 4 more rounds to go just for the rest day. Like,
yeah.
What's your strategy after this win?
I think just, you know, if you look at the past winners, even Vidit won it when he started with a loss. So it's not a tournament where you need to go all in from the beginning. It often can backfire. So just play good chess and see what happens. It's not I would say that the World Cup suits me better, so it's not like this is a end-all be-all when it comes to the candidates qualification.
Is there any specific player you're waiting to, play in this tournament or something?
Not really, no. I think there are many competitors. There's no one, let's say, favorite.
Yeah, so great game today, and all the very best for the rest of the
Thank you.
rounds. Thank you.